Krebs with BDC Research. BDC Research is a full-service technology research and advisory firm. Been in business for a better part of the last 40 years. And I head up a practice that focuses exclusively on enterprise mobility solutions. And what that means is we spend a lot of our time researching how enterprise organizations, how public sector organizations are investing in mobile solutions to support their frontline workforce, to be more productive, to engage better with customers, to collaborate better amongst one another. And the topic of the discussion today is really looking at some of the changes that we're seeing in the mobile market, and specifically some of the changes that we're seeing in the rugged handheld market as we migrate from legacy platforms to next generation or more modern platforms, and the impact that this is having, and the impact this is having on next generation solution selection decisions and customer requirements. So we're going to be looking at some of the things that we've seen in our research as it pertains to migrating these legacy mobile applications. So the impact of mobility in and amongst organizations is certainly significant, and has been over the last 10, 15 years, whereby we've seen businesses transform workflows and become more productive, and the results are quite significant. The research that we've done has shown significant returns on investment in terms of improved productivity, in terms of better customer engagement, in terms of sales improvements, in terms of operational improvements. And so businesses that have invested in mobile solutions and have looked at ways to leverage advances that we've seen in mobile technology and mobile applications and wireless networks have certainly reaped the rewards. One of the segments that, and quite frankly, one of the early areas where organizations made investments in mobile solutions was around rugged handheld technology, and these devices have been quite application specific and deployed across a number of sectors, supporting everything from logistics to warehouse management and retail automation types of applications. And today we're looking at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15 to 20 million rugged handheld devices deployed and supporting amongst the most sophisticated and critical or business critical mobile applications and mobile workflows. And what's happening to this segment and has been a significant pressure point over the last couple of years is that the majority of these 50 to 20 million rugged handheld devices are running on either Windows CE or Windows Embedded Handheld 6.5 operating systems, about 80–85% of them. Now these operating systems have effectively reached their end of their meaningful life and are now on sort of life support or extended service support being made available by Microsoft and the OEM community supporting them. Now that service support is also going to end by the end of this decade, by 2020, and so a lot of organizations are facing a lot of questions in terms of what to do with these investments and how to migrate and how to modernize these solutions. A lot of these organizations have also, because these solutions are so integrated within their businesses and within their workflows, they've held off on making decisions as they optimize and upgrade these applications, because there's been a lot of uncertainty in terms of especially the direction of the OS and which solution they should turn to next. And as a result, what we've seen happen with a lot of these mobile solutions is they've really lagged behind some of the advances that we've seen in the mobile market, some of the advances that we've seen certainly around more modern and intuitive mobile solutions. And as a result, we're seeing a widening gap in the level of satisfaction in applications and solutions that are being supported by these legacy devices. And one area where I think this, is perhaps a good, description of where we're seeing this happen is certainly in the warehouse, which is one of the primary environments where rugged handheld devices are used today, supporting inventory management and picking and placing and a variety of very time and task intensive solutions. Most of these applications, these warehouse applications, are fairly lightweight in the sense that these are terminal emulation solutions, largely green screen solutions that still rely on a lot of keyboard input to support. And they're not necessarily the most intuitive types of solutions. Certainly, someone who's been using them for a while is comfortable with them. But we see in the warehouse environment and logistics environments, a lot of the workers in this space are seasonal workers, are temporary workers, are contract workers. And getting them up to speed on these legacy solutions has become an increasing burden for organizations, especially organizations, say, for example, Amazon, that over the seasonal periods, over the holiday periods, will hire significant numbers of contract workers or seasonal workers, and they might take 2, 3, 4 days to fully onboard these workers, just based on sort of the nuances and complexities of the solutions that they're going to be using, of the mobile solutions they're using. Because everyone's expectation today of mobile solutions is being dictated by the device that they carry, for their personal lives in their back pocket, and are running either on Android or on iOS types of platforms. So we're starting to see that pressure be realized in organizations as the requirements for more touch-centric and a more graphical or visual interface is required. In addition, the cost certainly associated with maintaining and supporting these legacy solutions is only going up. So the timing is certainly here to address this. As I said before, a lot of organizations have held back and have been, somewhat conservative in their approach, and again, that's because they don't want to disrupt their operations and make the wrong technology investment decisions, given that their operations rely on these solutions to run. And as I said earlier, a lot of what we come to expect in mobility today is really being dictated by consumer devices. So in this chart, devices in the top left-hand segment, and what we've in the rugged handheld market, what we've seen over the last couple of years, and see OEMs start to respond to is there has been a gap in terms of devices that better mimic what their customers expect. In other words, more ergonomic solutions with more touch-centric interfaces, with more intuitive applications. And that gap or that void is starting to be filled, and we're looking at portfolios today from Zebra and certainly Zebra's peers that are on par, not only from a design perspective, from an ergonomic perspective, but also from a performance perspective when you're looking at the processing power and the memory configuration of these devices, given that these applications are only becoming more sophisticated. So this has been, again, one of the challenges certainly for customers is that they've been waiting for a portfolio to better fit sort of their expectations in terms of what modern mobile solutions look and feel like. And over this time, we've certainly seen a lot of organizations experiment with consumer technology in a number of different workflows and environments, including environments that had previously been supported by rugged devices. And there's been a lot of debate about whether or not it was viable to displace or replace a solution or that had previously been supported by rugged technology with a consumer device, perhaps protected through some type of case. And what we found, over the course of the last couple of years, as enterprises have experimented with this a little bit, even in environments like warehouse environments that are extremely harsh, and where the frequency of failure, and or the potential risk of failure is exposed. that organizations have come around, and it's not just the ruggedness that have made them realize that these devices are critical for their businesses, but it's also a number of other sort of capabilities, including the life cycle support that is so critical to enterprise decisions. And we've seen the pace of change in the consumer market and the frequency at which technologies change, and they're just happening at a pace that is not comfortable and not applicable for a lot of enterprise solutions. So what we've come to realize over the last, or what enterprises have come to realize, is that while there are certainly environments where consumer technology or consumer mobile devices are perfectly suitable, even in enterprise types of workflows, that the role and the requirement for rugged for a variety of line of business applications is still extremely critical. What the market was waiting for was a portfolio of solutions that didn't compromise the ruggedness, the life cycle support, the security, but delivered it in a way that it was more intuitive, more ergonomic, easier to use. But the challenge that still even halfway or more than halfway through 2016 that still sort of exists in this market and still is a headwind is that that the answer to the question as to where do I migrate next as my legacy Windows platforms reach end of life is still for a lot of organizations one that they're struggling with answering. So what we do know is we do know that these legacy platforms are reaching end of life. We do know there's probably about 15 to 20 million rugged handheld devices that will need to be upgraded over the course of the next couple of years. We do know that no matter what decision or no matter what platform an enterprise decides to migrate to next, that a recode of legacy applications and a rewrite of these applications will be required. We also know that the rugged mobile OEM community has certainly, as we have waited for sort of Microsoft to figure out their direction, they've turned to Android as a viable alternative and made some significant investments in creating Android-based solutions that address some of the enterprise requirements around lifecycle, around stability, around security, and have looked to address the gaps and address the concerns that organizations have when it comes to making investments in Android. What we also know is that this is, as I said, this is a conservative market that doesn't make decisions hastily and has certainly been taking its time with this decision. But I think one thing that's important to state is that in the past we used to have this very sort of isolated, if you will, segment of the market that was supported and was supported on these legacy Microsoft platforms, and it worked. But what we're starting to see happen today, and the reason I bring up this chart, which shows market share for smartphones, is that the market is increasingly being influenced by consumer technologies. So consumerization of IT is certainly a term that we've heard and we've experienced over the last couple of years. And today, iOS and Android, certainly in the smartphone space, and to a certain extent also in the tablet space, represent the lion's share of the market, 98, 99% plus, with Microsoft and BlackBerry, essentially becoming a rounding error in this space. And the reason this is important is that when you're thinking about it from the perspective of carriers and decisions that they are making as to what platforms or devices to support on their networks, when we're thinking about it from the standpoint of silicon vendors and their decisions in terms of what platforms to support and invest in, these are the charts that they look to, and these are the charts that they look to first. And therefore, we are increasingly seeing the influence from an ecosystem perspective on the enterprise space as well. and that means specifically on the rugged handheld space as well. Now, the market share for rugged handhelds obviously looks quite different. As I said before, legacy Windows platforms represent still today the majority of the installed base and still a fairly decent chunk of what is still being shipped. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is a couple of developments. One is Microsoft. They brought out 8.1, and the market quickly realized or acknowledged that 8.1 didn't meet the needs of the market and OEMs. Although there are products out there, the market quickly realized that that wasn't a viable option for these types or this class of device. The question with regard to Microsoft is Windows 10 IoT Mobile Enterprise. The expectation is that towards the end of this year, that there will be devices, which is again being delayed from earlier this year. But this platform, although a portion of the market is still anticipating it, will be a couple of years behind where Android is right now as far as a rugged handheld option. And we've seen over the last couple of years, a number of things happen. One is significant endorsement from some very large blue chip customers and large deployments in the retail sector and in the postal and courier sector. Certainly, showing a shift and the beginning of sort of the market reaching critical mass around Android. We've certainly seen in the ISV community, ISVs that in the past had supported Windows CE and Windows Mobile platforms have shifted their resources, their R&D resources towards Android as well as iOS, but again away from these legacy platforms. And from a portfolio standpoint, we're certainly seeing more and more devices come out from the likes of Zebra and their peers, running on Android and being designed specifically with Android in mind across a variety of types of use cases, from retail to logistics to now also increasingly warehouse types of environments. So Android is, there's some fairly strong headwind behind it, or momentum behind it, tailwind behind it. It's certainly not without its challenges, and there still are perception issues, and there are still holdouts, waiting for a viable Windows solution. But we've certainly come to the point, halfway through 2016, and quite frankly, halfway through 2016 and also in 2015, whereby organizations can confidently make investment decisions around rugged Android solutions. And quite frankly, the timing is becoming increasingly critical for a lot of these solutions. I think it's important to recognize that rugged handheld devices, when they're deployed, their upgrade cycle or replacement cycle is typically 4, 5, 6+ years, depending on the target application. So these are devices that are being deployed and being used for a fairly significant lifespan, certainly much longer than we use our personal smartphones today. But what is also true that is that the older that these devices get, the more vulnerable they become, and quite frankly, the more expensive they become to also maintain and support. And what we've seen over the last couple of years, especially as organizations sort of push back some decisions, waiting for more complete answers, is that the average age of the installed base of these rugged handheld solutions has increased, growing from 36% of the installed base being 4 years old or older to a couple of years back now being 42%, and probably has gone up a little bit since then. And that is significant because even though these are rugged devices, they also do fail. And when they do fail, it's a disruption to the workflow. These are workflows that are designed or mobile devices that are intricately embedded within these workflows. And that while overall failure rates over time have come down, there is still a significant difference in the failure rate of rugged handheld devices in their first year of operation and their fourth year of operation. And as our research has shown us that each percentage point increase in failure results in about a 5% increase in cost of ownership. So that's a significant issue for for this industry and one that's that's extremely important to address. And again, when we look at this issue, for a lot of organizations, they have generation upon generation of applications that they've customized and custom developed around Windows CE, Windows Mobile, and oftentimes that's hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and if not millions. So it's a significant undertaking. And what we've seen in terms of the barriers is, again, the cost and the time to recode these legacy applications, the concerns around security, the uncertainty around operating systems is certainly holding some organizations back. But when we're looking at sort of decisions moving forward in terms of what is important for next generation mobile application development, we've certainly seen some very interesting shifts in terms of perception, especially for line of business applications. Not surprisingly, security still is by far the number one requirement and the number one concern. But we're also seeing much more demands for intuitive user experiences, much more simplified and easy to access information. We don't want to have to scroll through and scroll down or click through multiple pages. It has to be intuitive. If you have to explain the application, it's like a bad joke. If you have to explain it, it's no good. So these are as we think and we move forward, extremely important considerations. And what we're starting to see also, analytics is becoming increasingly important. Workflow analytics, application analytics, as organizations look to modernize these solutions. So in looking at sort of the options and comparing them, and I think this is certainly very important because when we're looking at sort of these legacy types of solutions, there are certain types of capabilities that are important to customers. And what we saw, in some research that we recently conducted is, when selecting an OS, we asked, what the most important decision criteria were for end users. And number one, again, not surprisingly, was security. But number two was ability to customize, and then the third most important one was modern user interface. So when looking at it from a standpoint of Android versus Windows Legacy versus Windows 10 IoT Mobile Enterprise, customizability, for legacy Windows for CE certainly was a very flexible and customizable platform. Android similarly. Windows 10 will be more like iOS, or Windows 10 IoT Mobile Enterprise will be much more like iOS in the sense that it will be much more locked down. Android also a very user-friendly platform. Certainly, when looking to make these decisions, we want to ensure that the dev community and dev resources and development tooling is available. ISV support, as I mentioned, we have seen significant support amongst ISVs directed towards Android, directed towards iOS as well, but largely away from Windows. Device portfolio, that is improving. I give this about 2 stars now for Android solutions for rugged handheld devices. One of the big gaps has been the warehouse, but we're starting to see that. Fill out as well. Fragmentation still is a big issue, but that also was an issue with legacy Windows platforms. But one of the the flip sides of fragmentation is, and around Android at least, is that it allows OEMs to also provide backward compatibility and provide lifecycle support that extends back a couple of generations. So that if an organization is making an investment in an Android-based solution, that they're confident that the support that they need will be available over the course of the lifespan of that device, especially if that device is being used over the course of 3, 4, 5+ years. So that's increasingly important. So again, it's it certainly, it certainly is a big change, and it, for a lot of organizations, represents a significant investment. But one that we can comfortably say and confidently state here that the options around Android have matured to the point where they represent, certainly a viable, solution for a lot of enterprise applications, enterprise mobile applications. So just in summary, I think it's just a couple of points to remember when making some of these investment decisions. So when considering your next generation mobile enterprise platform, there are a couple of sort of areas of consideration and areas that I think are important to think about. One is certainly what type of developer resources are available, will be available, and the cost of those resources. The tooling, from a development tool perspective, from a software perspective, from a library perspective, how mature is that, and what's available? What are the enterprise use cases, in terms of, the interfaces, hardware interfaces, in terms of enterprise software and being able to interface with, back-end solutions, and user experience requirements, in terms of how familiar are end users with the platform, design considerations from an experience perspective. And then it's also extremely important, once the solution has been deployed, to also, to address support and deployment service support, and managing ongoing updates, managing any analytics requirements. Those are also extremely important. So planning for change constantly. I mean, the mobile market is certainly one that is the pace of change, the pace of innovation is certainly very rapid. Manage the new landscape to avoid future issues. Constantly conduct security assessments around your applications, and application threat assessments. And managing a solution that allows for retirement plans for existing solutions so that it can be done in a seamless fashion.